Hello, welcome everybody. Welcome to Jennie Nash as well. Thank you so much for being here. Everyone, you are in for a super treat.
Thanks for
Um,
having me.
you're welcome. Well, I was sort of thinking back, we've known each other a long time now, I
A
feel
very
like,
long time. Yeah,
maybe like 15 years or
yeah,
something.
I think that's
Um,
right.
but it's to me, it's really interesting. It's kind of an interesting time to talk because we have some perspective on how this world of book coaching has evolved over the years. And I feel like at that time, 15 years ago, it was maybe little known, and it seems to have grown into a bona fide professional need. Um,
Yes.
I thought it might be interesting just to open the conversation and hear kind of your experience of that or perspective or your observations over the years as this has evolved for you too, and maybe share a little bit too. I'm sorry, I probably should formally introduce you. Let me start with that, just for those who don't know who Jennie is. I feel like everyone should already knows you, but that's not the case. You are the creator of the book coach certification program at Author Accelerator, and you've taught hundreds of book coaches and thousands of writers how to use the blueprint for a book system to help them produce their best work in the most efficient way. And her own coaching clients have landed top New York agents and six-figure book deals with big five houses such as Penguin, Scribner, Simon and Schuster, and Hachette. And her most recent book that we'll kind of be zooming and focusing in on today is called Blueprint for a Memoir, which is a step-by-step process for defining what you want to say, deciding what to leave out, and crafting a pitch to the industry professionals who can bring it to life. And it's among other blueprint books that you've written as well, including Blueprint for a Book, Build Your Novel from the Inside Out. I think there's one about writing a nonfiction book, yes.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
also, she's written Read Books All Day and Get Paid for It, The Business of Book Coaching, among her own books that are, she's a novelist, has written memoirs. So you come with so much experience as well from your own writing and publishing over the years. So I just feel like that's why I'm sharing with all of you how what a treat it is, I think, just to get your perspective on all of this and guidance, particularly in the memoir area. So anyway, back to my original question. What have you
Yeah.
observed over the years?
Yeah. So it's a great question. The publishing industry has changed so much in the last 10 or 15 years, and it's changing right out from under us every day as well. It's a really fast moving um sort of wildly unpredictable place, and the world that we perhaps all knew before, which was a vestige of another world. So that the world I'm talking about is there are publishers, they select writers, they sort of lift them up, they help their career go along, and we all, that's what we all want. That world is gone. It does not exist anymore. The Every single client, I mean, I've had clients on the New York Times bestseller list, the Wall Street Journal bestseller list, just very successful people, and everybody has to market their work now. So that's thing one. Doesn't matter how big a book deal you get, I mean, unless you're Michelle Obama, but um even she worked hard to market her book. It That falls squarely on the writer now, and the demand of readers to have direct access to the writers that they read and to be engaged with them, that's all new. So anybody who thinks, well, I just want to write and I want to have somebody else take care of everything else, that world is gone. And so the book coaching has bubbled up because somebody needs to help guide the writers in that whole path to publication, the understanding of what your goals are, the understanding of what you can control and not control, the understanding of what your work needs to reach the mark that you want to hit. out there in the world, all of those questions and answers are the writer has to find for their own selves. And typically what happens is writers congregate together to try to find those answers, and it's the blind leading the blind in a lot of cases, or people with particular experiences that are only one experience, speaking for an entire industry. Those solutions are not great. So book coaches play a role that I think really agents and editors used to play, which is that nurturing of a writer's project and of a writer as the writer identity. So when we're writing a book, we're producing a product. That's a thing. And we're becoming something. We're becoming a writer. So those are the two areas that a book coach is going to help nurture and build in a writer is what is the product you are writing and making and putting out into the world, and how are you going to do that, and what are your expectations, and what are you going to invest in that in terms of time, effort, energy, money. And then becoming a writer, which is about mindset and identity and understanding what that means in your own life and the role that it plays in your own life, and the ups and downs in that, and the joys of that as well. So book coaching has become a thing because of those changes in the industry. It wasn't a thing before, it is a thing now. My company just certified our 200th coach this week, which is just crazy
Congratulations.
sauce. Thank you. And the reason that I'm doing this work is that I want there to be excellence in this industry, and there are lots of ways to achieve excellence, but the whole publishing industry is an apprentice industry. People learn how to be agents and editors by getting tutelage from other people. They have mentors. They're brought up in that system. People learn how to write the same way. Most people learn how to write by doing it and trying and failing, and they have 3 books in a drawer, and that it's an apprentice world. And so I wanted there to be a path for book coaches to have that apprenticeship and to be able to prove that they had a certain skills that they needed to do excellent work. And that's what I'm trying to stand for, is excellence and integrity in this brand new industry.
Hmm. What is your what's your feeling now about publishing, and where, like, in terms of guiding? Because what I hear from you is like you're not only guiding writers, as I do, through the story development process and what is this book, what are you trying to produce here, as you say, but then there's like the business end of things, which it sounds like you're also guiding writers in terms of where you how you publish. Are most of the writers you're working with interested in publishing? And if so, what is your um, what's your perspective on, in terms of how you go about guiding them to that, bridging that gap between writing the book and then sort of the business end of things?
Yeah, I my particular stance and philosophy is that I serve writers who want to be read. So there are a lot of reasons to write that are not that. So I think that's really important to understand from the writer's perspective. Some of the reasons to write that are not that are: writing is a fantastic way to know ourselves. It's a great way to heal. That's proven. It's um, it's a beautiful thing to write to because you enjoy it, or you want to learn how to do it better, or you want to write something to share with your family or your friends. These are all really good reasons to write, and really important reasons to write, and really valid reasons to write. Where I sit and where most of my coaches sit is helping people who in some way, shape, or form want to be read. So a big part of the work that we're doing then is, well, what does that mean to you? Does that mean you want to make money from your work? Does that mean you want to have an impact on your readers in a certain way? Does that mean that you want your story to help other people? So defining what your reasons for wanting to be read, as soon as you start asking that question, you're talking about the business of publishing. And again, what does it take in terms of time, effort, energy, and money? Do you have what it takes to want to go down that path? And there, I would recommend that everybody on this call go to Substack. So if you're not familiar with Substack, it's a place where writers can write directly to an audience and sometimes can be asked to be paid. So it's a sort of newsletter aggregate site that has become extremely important in the writing world. Yesterday, Courtney Maum, Maum is her last name, wrote a post. So Courtney Maum is the author of the book called Before and After the Book Deal. Um, that book came out about 3 years ago, I think, and her Substack is a fantastic resource. And yesterday she wrote a piece that, if you haven't heard about, there's a huge scandal where a debut author from an imprint at it was Del Rey, and I'm blanking on who owns that imprint. It's one of the big five, but this debut author falsified accounts on Goodreads to bring her fellow debut authors down. It's basically what it was. And there's some racially motivated elements to this as well. The whole thing is disgusting, to be perfectly honest. It's tragic. She had a $500,000 book deal that got pulled. Her entire career imploded in the last 48 hours. Courtney does a really great job of giving an overview of what happened. But the reason I'm pointing you to that is that this is the cautionary tale, right? If you're so desperate for your book to land in a particular way, or to achieve a particular thing, or to whatever that writer, I don't know her, I haven't read anything about the particulars of it. I trust Courtney's reporting and her stance, so that's where I got my information. But the whole, I mean, this is just one in a long series of similar-ish scandals. But the point is that the desperation to win at publishing is not what this is about. Meaning what I teach, the desperation to make it, to hit a certain metric, to make a certain money, to sell your book to the movies, to get a Reese Witherspoon book club pick. I mean, I did have a client who did get that, and I can tell you, you can't do anything to control that. So what we're talking about in terms of the book coaching that I do, and the book coaching that I teach, is you got to understand what you want and where you fit into this universe and what you're willing to do. And I don't mean, are you willing to cheat and lie to get what you want, but understanding what you can control and what can you not control, and then to control the things that you can control. So that's really the work that I am trying to do, is to help people understand those questions and parameters, and in a perfect world, before they start to write, because there's so much pain and suffering caused in writers who don't answer these questions. Somebody who is telling themselves that they're writing because they love it and for their own self, but secretly they want a big book deal. That's just a recipe for heartbreak. And whatever this writer that suffered this downfall was trying to achieve by these nefarious tactics, if she could have identified those things. So what I mean by that, if somebody comes to me and they say, I want to leave my day job, I want to make 6 figures as a writer, I want a big book deal that's important to me because I want to prove to my dad that I could make it as a writer. Like, if you can be honest about those things, as a book coach, I can say to you, okay, here are the pieces of that you can control. Here are some other ways to get the things that you are wanting. Here's maybe a piece where a therapist could help you. Here's, if you want to make six figures as a writer, here are the ways that typically that can be done. Do you want to do that? I mean, I have a very good friend of mine is one of the best selling romance writers of all
Mm,
time. She's had 22 books on the USA Today bestseller list. She makes millions of dollars a year. I know what it takes for her to do that. And, I'm able to say to somebody, is that what you want to, is that what you want to do with your writing, and
mm,
help them sort that out. So I can't guarantee that anybody's going to get that or do that, but I can help them understand the choices that they're making.
mhm,
So I come at this from uh, a probably a little bit more tough love than
mhm,
some people, but there is a place, I believe, for all writers, and there's a place for people who are helping writers at all different places in the process, all different reasons for writing. I don't want people to listen to me and think, wow, I just am trying to learn how to write, or I'm just trying to get my first book done, or I'm just trying to give myself permission to do this and to tell a good story. That's great, and that's where you start, and sometimes that's where you end. And I do not believe that everybody needs to come up to speed to where I am. Like, that's not what I'm talking about, but that is where the need that I have seen in the marketplace, and where I position myself.
mhm. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So I also know that with these blueprint books that you've opted to go, you've is it self-publishing with these more
Oh, for the
recent
blueprint
books?
books? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I
So
self-publish those. Yeah.
can you talk about kind of your perspective on the big five and sort of the emerging market of hybrid publishing versus um,
Yeah.
the self-publishing? And I think it's just so interesting that you've published with the big five and now are sort of moving in this other direction and exploring it. And what are you
Yeah.
finding?
So I chose personally to self-publish these blueprint books, because I believe that I had a clearer path to market them to the target audience than any publisher. I I'm if you Google book coach, I come up at the top. I'm the industry leader in this, and I have a very large audience and community in my business that these books are for. So I that was one thing, is I felt that I could reach the audience as well as anybody else. I also wanted to control them, and by that I mean, if I want to go on a big podcast and give away free books to everybody there that day, I can choose to do that. And I have done that. I've given away 600 free books at an event because I wanted to. You can't do that if you are being published by a big publisher.
Hmm.
I also have a technology set up where all of the coaches that I certify can give my books for free to the clients that they work with. So that I
Hmm.
couldn't do that with a publisher. So my decisions were about creative control and marketing. So there are sometimes, as in this case, very, very good reasons to self publish. And one of the changes that we've begun to see is that if a writer feels that they have the pathway to get their book into readers' hands, then why do they need a publisher? It used to be that a publisher was the only way. That's what I mean by that world is really gone, because what the argument is, well, if I'm published by Simon and Schuster, I'll be in all the bookstores. Well, there are not that many bookstores left, right? So that argument is doesn't hold as much water as it used to. Um, if the argument is, well, I'm thinking of my friend Mary Laura Philpott. She wrote a book
Hmm.
that came out, I believe, in 2022 called Bomb Shelter. That that is a spectacular, uh, just beautiful and powerful memoir. And it's her second book, and she is a indie bookstore darling. And by that I mean she worked with Ann Patchett at Parnassus Books in Nashville for many years. She was Ann Patchett's, partner in the beginning years of that bookstore. Um, not technically partner, but she was there making it all work out. And she is a champion of indie bookstores, and this was the place that she wanted her book to be sold, and she traditionally published it, and it did sell in those bookstores, and it sold well. And that was a situation in which that was her goal. She really wanted that. She really wanted a book that would be directed to the audiences in those stores and lifted up in those stores, and that sort of path forward. So that, again, it goes back to the writer's goals. What are you looking to that publisher to help you do? What are you wanting from that publisher? If somebody wants to be in airport bookstores, if they want to be in Costco and Target, there are reasons now. There have always been reasons to publish in that way, but there's a growing number of writers. You mentioned hybrid. I've a, I mean, I've had clients publish with Big Five. I've had clients do all different hybrid publishers. I've had clients self-publish. They've all had amazing successes, but they've defined what those successes are going to be. And this is the drumbeat that you keep hearing me talk about, that you're not going to achieve what you want to achieve if you don't define what you want to achieve. So I think what used to be true is that being published by a publisher used to be the way that a writer got a stamp of approval, right? You were chosen, you were plucked out of the slush pile. Like, I worked at Random House at my first job out of college. It's literally what I did. And it was an actual physical pile of manuscripts. And that was what we all wanted, was to be picked. And the changes in the publishing industry, to me, the biggest change is that there is no more really being picked. You pick yourself now. And there is there's no question that if your book is picked by Simon and Schuster or Knopf or Penguin or whatever, that lends itself a certain credibility and pride, and all those things. But there was a recent piece by Brooke Warner, who is the publisher of She Writes Press. She's a good friend of mine. I think it was actually on her Substack as well. Um, I'm trying to think of the topic that you could search for to find this, but she wrote a piece in which she I'm going to get all the names wrong, you guys. This is because my brain is so full of all the things. There was a situation in which a young TikTok star got a book deal for many millions of dollars. It was a novel, and did not write the book. Hired a ghostwriter to write the novel for her, for which she got this multiple $1 million deal because she was a TikTok star. And Brooke Warner wrote about this case. It was within the last couple months. It was not that old. And what she said was, does this mean that traditional publishing is the new vanity press? If that's what traditional publishing is allowing to happen, does that mean that that's the vanity? It used to be the vanity press was self-publishing. Like, I make my own book because no one will pick me. But if the big five publishers are picking only TikTok stars because they're TikTok stars, not because of what their writing is, doesn't that make that the vanity? So it's like things are so turned upside down that's why a lot of the big five publishers are looking for what I would call risk-free projects. So a risk-free project is that person has an audience already. they're in some other realm. It's not about the writing, it's not about the work, it's about the celebrity of that person.
Hmm.
And we still have, I just finished reading a novel 2 days ago by Alice McDermott, who I've been reading my whole life. I think she's about my age. And this new book is called Absolution. Oh my gosh, what an incredible novel. She's an incredible writer. She's what we would probably define these days as a literary writer, although that term is fuzzy. But why does she get published? Well, she gets published because she's written 10 other books that have done really well. She gets published because she's a spectacular writer. Does her book sell a lot or not? We probably not compared to the TikTok stars, but that in some ways is not a path available to all of us. I probably can't write a beautiful book and get picked. I don't have a big enough niche or audience or what have you. The people that we hear, the stars, the young debut sci-fi fantasy writer who's written some epic thing and it's going to be part of a whole new series. What we have to remember is that's like the 0.0001% of writers out there. So this is a long answer to the question that what traditional publishing used to be is changing. What success as a writer means is changing. Everything's changing, and it's up to us to know what we want. And I have found that this question is incredibly hard to answer, and it demands unbelievable self-awareness. Why do you write? What do you want your writing to be for you? What place does it play in your life? um, these questions are really hard to answer. And I think people dig themselves holes and get into a lot of trouble with their writing because they don't answer them. They think the answers are going to come through the writing itself. And sometimes that happens, but not very often.
Hmm. Do you, and just the, because I kind of also want to get into blueprint and some of the actually story development aspect of what you do. But
Yeah.
before we do, I want to just touch on one more thing in terms of self-publishing and the hybrid and sort of where publishing is going. Do you feel like it's becoming more mainstream? And what about that kind of vetting process and quality? How is that measured? I mean, because there is still this, unless you hire a book coach and a professional editor, there it is flooded with all sorts of content that the quality is potentially questionable. So can you speak to that?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that self-publishing is already mainstream. I don't think it's becoming. I think it's already there. There are huge, huge audiences of people that self-published writers are reaching, and there's a giant industry of people helping self-published writers. Some of them in that industry uh, bad apples, and others not, just as in every other industry. But the idea that this is a new thing, it is a thing. It is here. It's at the center. It's huge, and a lot of writers are realizing what they give up to publishers. I mean, we could talk all day about the way the money flows, but there's all kinds of data now um, that people lose money when they publish with traditional publishers. So the other reason that we know it's mainstream, there's an industry newsletter called The Hot Sheet by Jane Friedman. Um, I'll just put her name in here really quickly. It's Jane Friedman, The Hot Sheet. It's a paid newsletter, but Jane Friedman has been for years considered one of the most comprehensive thinkers about the publishing industry. She used to run Writer's Digest years ago. She has a more than 50,000 people follow her. Excuse me. She's just a brilliant thinker about the publishing industry. And the hot sheet is like the industry insider newsletter for understanding what's happening with publishing. She does a lot of analysis on like the Supreme Court case with the what it wasn't collusion, it was can't think of what the word was, but those types of things. So she just announced that the hot sheet is going to be home to the first ever self-publishing bestseller list. So it's going to
Incredible.
be, yeah, equivalent to like the USA Today list, or the
Hmm.
which is sheer numbers, that list, or the New York Times list for self-publishing. And it's in conjunction with some of the industry's biggest players. But the idea that we haven't had that, she and other people have been saying, is ridiculous, because these books are in many cases selling many, many more copies than traditionally published books. And the people that put forth the traditional bestseller lists have chosen to ignore that. But so when I say it already is mainstream, these are some of the things that I mean by that. And the reasons. So you brought up the big problem, right? So the big problem is, you and me and my next door neighbor and their cat and their child can all publish a book tomorrow if we want. Like, there is no barrier to entry anymore. So there are a lot of bad books, and there are a lot of bad books that sell well. And that's something that I've had to wrap my mind around over my career. It's upsetting to people who love words and stories, but um, sometimes people don't actually want good writing, and the readers decide in that world. And I'm sure you've had the experience where you read a book and you're like, what? Like, this is garbage, but everybody's reading it. So that's what I mean by everything's turned upside down, and we have to decide for our own selves, is that a thing you want to make and produce and put out there? And some people, it may well be, and other people don't want that, or have a different goal in mind, or a different idea of success in mind. And that's what I mean by having to choose or decide that, what is the measure of success? Is it just how many books you've sold? um or is it that you wrote a good book that you're proud of, that impacts your readers and your readers love? And there's this idea of 1,000 true fans, that you can make a career with 1,000 true fans. Is that what we're looking for? So I mean, these are big, big questions and big, big topics, but I would say that self-publishing is a absolutely viable path for getting books into readers' hands, making money, doing good work, having an impact. Any of the things that you would think you could get from traditional publishing, you can get from hybrid or self-publishing. And also, there's a lot of bad books in those spaces too. So,
Hmm.
but as that example that I just gave with the TikTok star,
Hmm.
there's a lot of potentially bad books out everywhere. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah,
Hmm. Um, so thank you for all that, because it's
you're
really,
welcome.
really satisfying to hear your perspective. And I want to make a, kind of a sharp turn here into like the story development process, because I see a lot
Totally.
of questions coming in here about memoir and the development of your memoir and how to write a memoir, which you've laid out so beautifully, a method in your blueprint for a memoir book. Um, so, kind of as a way in, you write here that the blueprint comprises 14 questions about the foundational elements of your story. And just by way of like contextualizing memoir, just wondering, since you've written one also for nonfiction, books, which for those of you, I saw a question come through. Can you just, for the audience, differentiate between nonfiction and memoir? What you mean by that?
I can, and it's not easy. So the way that I differentiate it, memoir has changed a lot in recent years. There's new ways of talking about it. You might hear the term hybrid memoir, which is different from a hybrid publisher. A hybrid memoir is a memoir that also includes other nonfiction elements, which I'll get to in a minute. There's also the idea of memoir plus, which is the same term for a similar thing. So, a book that is your story, but also includes perhaps literary analysis or interviews with other people or cultural analysis of some kind. These are the books that are hybrid memoirs or memoir plus, and lately a lot of the memoirs that have been doing really well in the marketplace fall into these categories. So a memoir used to be considered a straight narrative, which is to say, this is a story from my life. And a nonfiction book, I mean, it's easy if it's biography or if it's somebody doing journalism about a topic, those are clearly nonfiction. But
Or self-help, I would say. It
or
falls
self-help
under.
or how to, or business books, all that. Now what's confusing is that a lot of those books also include memoir from
Mm,
the writer's life. So someone like Adam Grant, for example, who writes, he's an organizational psychologist, big best-selling books. He writes about topics related to achievement in business. He's going to be telling stories from his own life in his books, but that doesn't make them memoir. A
mm,
lot of it is intention. If the intention is to teach something, to be instructional or prescriptive in some way, that's how I characterize nonfiction. If
mhm,
the intention is to, I mean, a memoir still may teach and inspire and instruct, but not explicitly.
mhm,
So if it's
mhm,
explicitly doing that, I call it nonfiction. If it is primarily a narrative from your own life that you're telling, then I would call it a memoir. And the the other thing to be clear about is, if at any time you change something in your story, including a location, the order of events, anything factual, you're writing fiction. Now you're writing fiction. So the you can change names in a memoir. That is a thing that people do. And there's also sometimes this concept of what's known as like a composite character, where maybe you're writing you don't want to call somebody out, so you're making a composite person to stand in for that person. That gets a little dicey. Usually you have to disclose that, or you would want to disclose that, because here's the thing, this is the real thing. When you write memoir, you are making a contract with the reader, and it is an explicit contract. If I say I am offering you this memoir, I am saying this is a story that I experienced and lived from my own life that I believe to be true to the best of my ability. I believe this to be true. That's the contract you're making with the reader. And if you violate that contract and you fudge things, or you um like I said, put things out of order. It happened in London, but we're going to make it Paris instead. You violated the contract with the reader, and they will get mad at you. And they have gotten mad at you. So that's how I tend to define them. But one more thing I want to say on this, the decision points that lead to these different paths are really critical decision points, and again, should be made with intention, um, and so that you know what you're doing and why you're doing it, and what the reader is going to expect from it.
mhm. Makes sense. So back to what I was kind of for context purposes. So the blueprint for a memoir has these 14 foundational questions pertaining to your story.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, since you've also written a blueprint for a nonfiction book as well, and for a novelist as well, if you're writing fiction, where does because I haven't read the novel one, for example, the
Right.
blueprint for a novel. How are those questions similar? Because a story is a story, is story, right? Where
Yeah.
like there's certain story principles. Can you tell us what makes memoir, the blueprint for a memoir, unique to the
Yes.
other ones?
Yes, I can. And this answers a question that I think Wendy asked in the chat as well. So, before I answer this question, I want to remind people of what I just mentioned before of what my stance is. So, the subtitle of this memoir blueprint is How to Write a Memoir for the Marketplace. So, if you're writing a memoir for other reasons,
Mm.
this is not going to apply to you. But the anybody that wants to write memoir for the marketplace, which is they want readers to read it, the key thing that people get wrong and that differentiates memoir from fiction um, is you really have to center the reader. So the steps in the blueprint for memoir that don't appear in fiction, there's two categories of them. One is around this idea of centering the reader, and I'll talk about what that means in a minute. The other is around the idea of approaching the marketplace. So I do, for my clients, require book proposals for memoir pitching. I think it's one of the reasons my clients have been so successful is because a book proposal is a sales document. It's a business case for the book. So if you're writing memoir, it's who is my audience? How am I going to reach them? Where are they going to encounter this book? Why do they need this book? What other books like it are out there? Those questions of positioning the story in the marketplace are critically and important. And I can give a very specific example of how this works. One of our book coaches, her name is Suzette Mullen, Mullen, um, specializes in coaching memoir and wrote a memoir her own self. And she worked with a bunch of our coaches on that as well, and including me, and tried to sell it to traditional publishers and couldn't get any traction. It's a book. The memoir is about Suzette came out as gay after 30 years of marriage to a man. So she blew up her whole life and started a new one in her 50s. So that's what the book is about. Couldn't get any traction from traditional publishers, and then she learned that there was a imprint at the University of Wisconsin Press that was specifically focused on um, coming out stories. So she pitched them, which is to say, she wrote a query letter and said, I have a complete manuscript and a book proposal. So that's what I teach. And they said, great, send us the book proposal. They didn't even want to see the manuscript. Based on the book proposal, they then said, okay, send us a couple chapters. Based on those chapters, they said, okay, great, send us the manuscript. And then it went through the peer review. Long story short, that book is coming out from the University of Wisconsin Press in February.
Hmm.
And I also saw in the chat someone asking about what to leave in and what to leave out. On January 2nd, at the Am Writing, the hashtag Am Writing podcast, I have an interview with Suzette coming out precisely on that topic,
Hmm.
on what she left out. And she has a document of the scenes she cut and why she cut them. It's fantastic. So that's at the Am Writing podcast in January. You can listen to that. So the point that I'm making is that Suzette sold that book because she had a book proposal and she knew who her audience was, what the comp titles was, what the positioning was. That kind of work is critically important to somebody who wants to write memoir for the marketplace.
Hmm.
So the blueprint includes the work on those realms, and then which fiction does not.
Mm,
And because fiction is sold so purely on the story,
mhm,
the blueprint also includes this concept of centering the reader. So in the fiction blueprint, there's a tool called the inside outline. And the inside outline is designed to solve the biggest problem that people make in writing fiction. And the biggest problem they make in writing fiction is not tying the gosh, I'm so immersed in memoir that I'm like, what is the point of the
mm,
inside outline? It's not tying the point of the scene to the emotion the character is feeling. It's
mhm,
marrying those two things together, and the
mm,
inside outline helps solve for that. In the memoir blueprint, there's a tool called the impact outline. And
mhm,
what that does is it's designed to solve the biggest problem memoir writers have, which is they don't center the reader. So, what I mean by centering the reader is, let's say I have a story that I'm telling from my own life, and I'm just like blah 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 blah. I'm telling it. We all hear stories like this every day, and we want to die of boredom. They're just about the teller. They haven't thought about who's going to read this, why are they going to read this, where are they encountering, where are they in their head when they're encountering this story, what do they need from this, what should I show them,
mm,
what are they going to be feeling along the way. And in that memoir blueprint, I have a sample impact outline from a client that I worked with who went through this transformation with her work. And it was mind blowing because
mhm,
she originally came to me with this idea to write a story that was a story about grief. Her brother had died. Um, he was the pilot of a jumbo jet that crashed in a fiery, big headline crash. And she wanted to write a story of grief, which is a very popular category of memoir. People love these books. I love these books. But her story was frankly terrible. It was like we were so sad. We had the funeral and it was sad. My family was sad. My mom was sad. It was just sort of like all these scenes are not even really scenes of kind of what I would call surface level events in the life of a grieving family. And it was sort of like, okay, why should I, the reader, care? What is in this for me? I don't need to hear these kind of bland recountings of the way you felt. That doesn't help me, doesn't bring me into it. It I feel left out as a reader when I'm reading those pages. So centering the reader for her was answering all these questions. Is this a story about grief, or is it a story about something else? And in that conversation, we came to the realization that it was not a story about grief. It was this author happens to be a civil engineer. She worked her whole career for the city of Los Angeles. When there was a disaster in the city of Los Angeles, earthquake, fire, whatever, you name it, she was one of the first people on the scene to figure out what happened here with the infrastructure. How do we need to get this infrastructure back into place? And so when the plane crashed, she immediately started doing that work on why the plane crashed. Did it crash for the reasons they said? Are they telling us the truth? That was her real story. And so when we figured that out, that it wasn't actually a story about grief, that's a thread of the story. It was a story about this other thing. She went on a 15-year quest to absolve her brother. It's a bonkers story. And then what she was able to do is to start thinking about, why would a reader care about the infrastructure problems in airlines? Well, it's like, oh, hey, did you read that New York Times article where they said that in June 2023 there were 47 near miss, airplane incidents on US airspace? Um, have you seen that every single air crash in the last 20 years has been blamed on pilot error? What does that mean for us when we step on a plane? Like all of a sudden she starts thinking about who
mm,
would care. and it like cracked this whole thing open.
Hmm.
And she wrote this spectacular book about flying and fear of flying and the trust we place in these institutions, and how do we know that they're telling us the truth, and what happens when they don't tell us the truth, and why do we blame pilots, why do we blame my brother. She digs and digs and digs into this from her area of expertise, and it becomes this just gorgeous meditation on basically being alive and the risk that we have in being humans who are alive. And and it is also a story about grief, but it's so much more than that. And
Hmm.
that's what I mean by her impact outline is in the book as an example. And what you can see is the impact outline forces you at every single step, every single scene of the memoir to say, what is the reader experiencing here? And if you get into your story and it's the same answer every time, the reader sees that I'm sad. The reader sees that my mom was sad. The reader sees that my family was sad. I'm simplifying it. But
Mm-hmm.
then
Hmm.
it's like, that's not a story. You are not
Hmm.
centering the reader. What is the reader going to feel? Tell us what they're going to feel, and then write to that, so that you're bringing us through a transformation. And those are the stories where when it says the reader is going to be crossing their fingers that I don't make this decision, the reader's going to be so relieved that I, did this or that. The reader is
Hmm.
going to wonder, what is the matter with you? Like the reader is going to be angry at me. Then all of a sudden you're
Hmm.
centering the reader in your memoir. So that's the main work of the blueprint. Those two reasons how it's different from fiction and nonfiction is centering the reader. You also have to do that in nonfiction, but it's not actually the primary concern because it's explicit. So centering the reader and positioning the book in the marketplace.
Hmm. Excellent. So helpful. I was wondering that because I did notice when I was reading the blueprint for a memoir, because I was familiar with the inside outline. And I thought, oh, there's this additional impact step.
Yeah.
So that answered my own question. I want to bring on Valerie Locker here. She's a writer who's been in my workshops, who's deep into writing her full length memoir. I'll let her describe the story. She's been using Jennie's book to kind of flesh out her concept. And I just want to find her on here. There you are, Valerie. Okay. Um, and I thought it would be great to apply to work with some of these foundational questions as it applies to Valerie's story, to see, here you talk about the question, why it's important, and then see how it's applied to an actually story in progress and development. So hi, Valerie.
Hi.
We can hear you. That's a good thing.
Okay.
So anyway, so let's jump in. Obviously, we're not going to get through all the questions, but let's maybe highlight some of them so people can get a sense. The first one being the why. Why are you telling the story? But I think maybe even before we dive into that, can Valerie, you maybe share just uh, the basic premise of your story, so we have some idea of the territory in which that you're writing in.
Yeah. So the story is that it's a journey of healing after taking my young son Brian. It's a grief memoir, through cancer treatment, which spanned 4 years, and then his death. But it's supposed to be a story of hope because it's about the healing, that it's really about my journey as a mother and the healing journey that I went on after that. And how I forged a new path to healing, and then eventually found a new relationship with my son in heaven. And so as Karin and maybe a lot of people here know, I've struggled a lot with other themes that there were so many sub themes that have come up in my writing, and so how to include those in that journey.
Um, I mean, wow. That's an incredible story that you've lived in your life. So the first thing that I would say, there's two things that struck me with what you said. Um, it sounds like you have two books. It sounds like you're writing two books. Like you said, the grief story and the story of my healing. I mean, the story of 4 years of your son having cancer and his death and the grief over that is a whole story. Um, there's a whole category of this kind of story that is beautiful and powerful and um, could be a great story. The story of your subsequent healing and spiritual discovery is a different story. So it could be that you're trying to tell those two stories uh, on top of each other. So the first thing I would do is peel those apart. And by that, I mean, obviously, the story of your healing and spiritual reconnection with your son is going to include the story of his death, but it's a question of what is the trunk of the tree. So a tree only has one trunk. You can also think of this as the spine that holds the story up. And a lot of people writing memoir particularly get into trouble here because it's our life. We all have so many stories. We have so many things that were important to us. We have so many dramas. We have so many tree trunks. We have whole forests within us. And what the memoir writer is having to do is to say, it's this tree trunk. It is this one. And there's branches, to be sure, and there can be big branches. So in your case, whichever, it sounds like you would center the healing story, that's your trunk. And then the biggest branch is going to be your son's death, but it's not the same story. So I would say untangling that and choosing. The hardest part of writing, you guys, is choosing. It's so hard to choose. It's so hard to say, actually, I'm not writing a book about my son's death, because that event is probably the axle of your life. And that's a phrase from a novel. Did anybody ever read Cold Mountain, that novel Cold Mountain? It's a phrase I remember years and years and years ago from that book, the axle of my life, right? Like that's the story of your life, but it might not be the story of your book. So making that decision is the first thing. And then the same answer goes to the next thing I heard, which is, and I have all these other things, right? And everybody does, every memoir writer does all these other things. But here's what I would say unequivocally. The best memoirs, unless you're Michelle Obama, the best memoirs that writer has chosen. They have really chosen, and they have taken us down a very specific path. And if you study what they've done, they've left out so many things. So that memoir I mentioned by Mary Laura Philpott, Bomb Shelter, which, by the way, look up the New York Times review of that book. Is the most rave review one could possibly have for a memoir. It was nuts how much the reviewer praised this book, and the specific things that she praised are very instructive to us all as memoir writers. But the reason I bring up that book is that it's very specifically a book about the pain of being a mother, the incredible vulnerability that you put yourself into when you become a mother, and how it never goes away, and how really actually awful it is, and how exposed you feel. And that's what the book is about. We do not hear more than a couple paragraphs about her entire marriage, how she met her husband, what their love affair was like, what their marriage life is like, how it's like totally off stage. We hear very little about Mary Laura's career, totally off stage. You might read that book and think she doesn't have any friends. Like there's there's whole giant categories of her life that are not in the book, and that's because she really specifically chose. And I happen to have worked with her just as a friend at a critical point in the writing of that memoir, where she's writing about her son's epilepsy. And there was a moment at which she could have centered that. It could have been a book about epilepsy or about being the mother of a child with epilepsy. That absolutely could have been a direction she chose, right? The trunk of the tree that she chose. And she chose a different trunk. It's like, no, that's not the story. The story is this. And it's that choosing that makes things excellent. So the the general problem challenge, I guess I should put it, with writing memoir is you're asking your brain to leave out parts of your life that are so important and that are so central to your life. And so I don't know what other things you're struggling with or with what other threads, but I would say in general, leaving things out is what makes things great. um, right? So what are some of the other threads?
Yeah, and I would say that I'm pretty clear that the trunk is the healing journey and not the cancer journey. So I'm clear on that, and those would just be to those scenes of the cancer journey would just be to illuminate for the reader kind of what the mother went through in her relationship with her child.
Right.
So, but I mean, yeah, the other levels are kind of like one of them actually is motherhood and what it means to be a mother. And my the working title is Lost and Found. I had a very troubled childhood, and so when I was grieving my loss of my son, I ended up grieving every loss that I had had in my life. And so it was a lot of that, and working through those losses and coming to forgiveness of on many different levels of people in my life, my parents, myself, and the doctors, right? I mean, I just it was basically forgiveness of everyone and everything. So that's one theme. The layers kind of trauma that came from that. And so there was a lot of it's really a spiritual journey. And so when you were talking about the woman with the airplane, the brother, in that book, and how it ended up really being about, why we're here. And so my book is I feel like it's kind of coming to that, where it's like these questioning that we do when we have a deep loss like that. For me anyway, asking a lot of questions. And while I may not want to tell the reader these are the answers, I think a big part of it is asking those questions and getting our answers for ourselves. And so I might say these were my answers, but the main point is, what did I do with this massive loss? And I think some people choose to heal and some people don't, and we make choices.
Wow, that was really beautiful. I would urge you to go back and listen to yourself on the recording, because it was really powerful. It was really beautiful. And what I'm hearing, I heard two different things, both of which were great. One, you probably said the word forgiveness 6 times. So that's interesting, right? Is it the idea of forgiving oneself, the idea of forgiving one's parents, the idea of forgiving the universe, for this loss, like that idea, a book about forgiveness from someone in your situation, having gone through what you did and asked these questions, is incredible. it's incredible. But what I want to point out is it's different from a book about healing. So a book
Mm.
about healing is how I got over this. Like, how did I even get up and keep living and get over this? There is a large number of readers who would be desperate for that book, who would want that book. So one of the things to think about, that I like to think about, is where is your reader encountering your book? Are they going to buy it? Are they going to the bookstore? Are they going to search Amazon? In the first 24 hours after they suffered this loss, in the first 6 months after they suffered this loss, in the first year, are they like, how do I get up in the morning and carry on? That's a book, a different book, right? um a book about healing and getting over that loss, and how do we go on. A book about forgiveness, I think they would encounter later in their own grieving process, that when you could begin to allow that to enter your mind, or it feels to me like that's a different story. That the story of how what you said really struck me was, and I'll tell you why it struck me, because I think it's important. I just became a grandmother, which is cool. But I have had a similar experience that you experienced with this death, of being a grandmother, which has brought all this stuff up for me about how I don't feel that I was mothered, and grief over that. And I tried so hard in my own mothering of my children to be different than my mother. All that stuff came bubbling up with the birth of this grandchild. I didn't expect it. It's really been troubling, because everyone's like, Grandma, yay! And I'm like, ah! Right? So I think there are a lot of people who experience things, not necessarily deaths or losses, but things that do what happened to you. They call up all this stuff, and all of a sudden we have a totally different relationship to ourselves and the world. And that book has a different audience than the book of the person who's trying to get over the death. So do you see what I mean by parsing this out? Like, what really do you want to write, and who do you want to consume that story? It the You can see how, depending on what you choose, which branch the death of your son is in that story might change. Where you put the death in the story might change. um so that was one thing I heard in what you said, all this about forgiveness, and this other stuff bubbling up, um and how it wasn't then just about his death, it was about these other losses. um could be a book about loss, it could be a book about forgiveness. So it's really defining what it is, and what you want for it to be, which brings us full circle back to centering that reader. What does your reader need? What did they Where in your process do you wish somebody had taken your hand and shown you a way? That's what your book's going to do. So where is that person? Does that make sense?
I think so. I mean, I think all books, I think, have multiple themes, though, threads. Maybe they're not themes. Themes, threads. So, but you're saying that there just needs to be one big one, and then these other ones
Yeah.
are tiny. Maybe, I don't
They
know.
don't have to be tiny. They don't have to be tiny. They can be, so I use the tree trunk metaphor. Another metaphor is like a braid. It could be, you're braiding threads together. The way that I'm talking about it, I sounds reductive. Like, you may only write about forgiveness. That's not what I mean. But I think that extreme way of thinking is helpful when you're trying to pin down, when you're having the feelings that you're having, like, I have all this material, and there's this theme, and there's that theme, and there's the other, and there's this, and there's the death, and there's my healing, and blah, 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 which, by the way, is every memoir writer. It just helps to say, okay, my writer's walking into a bookstore. Why? What are they looking for? People come to books because they need something.
Mhm.
Every single book, and Jeff, fiction for sure as well. They need something. What do they need? They need, that's what we're trying to figure out. They need solace. They need education. They need comfort. They need a path forward. They need reassurance. They need confidence. They need escape. They need like I'm a 20 something plus year breast cancer survivor, and when I was diagnosed, I went to the bookstore, because back in the day there were bookstores, and it was like, I want a book by somebody that's going to answer every single question I have. It's like, great, here's a doctor who's written a book on breast cancer Q&A. I'm buying that book. Right. And then it's like, and then I need a book on what the heck just happened to me, and my whole life is turned upside down, and I have these 2 little kids and what have you. Oh, here's a memoir of a survivor and what it was like. I need that. I need, like, why are you there, and what do you need in that moment, and what is your book going to give to the person? Because the danger is, if you don't do that, this is the danger. This is a nasty thing that I'm going to say, but it's a real thing. Agents have a term for memoirs. It's called a misery memoir, and these are the memoirs they reject, right? And it's a story that's just like, sad things happened to me. And I was sad. And like, there are so many books that can fall into that category. And from the perspective of the writer, again, it's the most dramatic thing that happened to them. So of course, that's the trunk of their tree. But unless we know where is the writer coming to this from, like, here's a perfect example that I'll give, that is very specifically about the story you're writing. So the book When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi. Did you read that one?
I just finished it.
Amazing, right?
Yeah, beautiful.
Beautiful. Okay, so it's, for those who don't know, it's a surgeon who's chronicling his own death from cancer. He doesn't finish the book, his wife finishes it for him. But it's like inside a doctor's brain whilst this is going on. Amazing book. Did, huge bestseller, did really well, blah, blah, blah. Love it. So then a book comes out called The Bright Hour by Nina Briggs, I believe is her name. And it's a book about a woman who dies from cancer and chronicles her own death. And immediately you're like, but Paul Kalanithi wrote that book. Why do we need your book, Nina Briggs? Right? That's what I think in my book coaching brain. And then you read it and you realize she had 2 little kids when this happened. Paul Kalanithi's relationship to children, I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't read it, is different.
Mm-hmm.
So then the reader is like, ooh, interesting, different story. Wonder, how that goes. And I read that book, also an amazing book. And we need all the books, right? We need all the books. But the point that I'm making here is, a mother who is dying, or somebody who's caring for a mother who's dying, would have very specific reasons for wanting that book in addition to the Paul Kalanithi book. And what I found fascinating is, within the pages of the Bright Hour, the author references the Paul Kalanithi book, and you're like, yes, because she of course read his book too, right? And what I just love this moment for that writer, because we all know that what she probably said in her own head is, I shouldn't write my story. He already did it. Nobody needs mine. But she didn't say that. She's like, people do need mine. I need to write it. Here's who my reader is. Here's what they need. Here's what I'm going to give to them. And her story is just, I think in some ways more affecting, maybe because I'm a mother my own self, but um, so that's what I mean, that it's not like you have to come up with like something original or new or whiz bang or this or that, but who is that person? What are they coming to your book for? What do they need? And centering that is choosing that spine of that tree. And if you're going to weave together different themes, which a lot of books do, absolutely. Once you pick that spine, what I would do is color code your outline, literally color code it. So it's like, here's the spine. Is it the most prevalent color? Because it should be. Here's the other two threads, and when they appear, and I think of it as a tapestry, and you're weaving a thread through. When do we see it? When does it appear? When does it come to life? When is it big? When is it bright? When does it go down under? And play with the structure in those broad terms so you can see how those themes connect. Be that conscious about it is what I would is what I would do. Um, and but just know what the center is, know what the trunk is, because that's going to be what makes, those are the books we press into people's hands, right? You have to read this book. A friend, it's like giving them a prescription. A friend who's going through something, oh, you have to read this book because this book is that. And what I was saying, the danger of not doing that is you write a book that's just sort of all the things for all the people and all the time, and nobody ever says this moment for you is the book that you have to read. Nobody ever says that because it's all the things. So I hope that helps.
That's very helpful.
I have a question, and I'm going to ask Valerie first. Is the healing journey connected to, is the way you healed because you forgave?
Right. So
Are they,
that's the question. Yeah. I mean, that's the question.
is that,
It's integral, I think. I do.
Yeah.
Maybe. Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly how you start to sort these things out, is because in your head they're all glommed together. This terrible situation that happened, this tragic death, this grief, this life after, this healing, this forgiveness, it's all glommed together because it's your life. And the writer's work is doing that, is exactly this. It's like, okay, is it a book about grief? Actually, no, it's a book about healing. Okay, is it a book about healing? Because what does healing look like? Well, healing looks like forgiveness. So is it a book about forgiveness, or is forgiveness the end of the healing? Like it's doing that, like. And that's why, I mean, I know I made it, but that's why I love the blueprint, because it allows you to try these things on like a coat. Like, I'm going to do the blueprint as if this were a book about grief. Do the blueprint. Then you look at that and you're like, don't think so. Something's missing. I'm going to do the blueprint as if it's a book about healing. And you do that and you're like, yeah, this is closer, but something missing. I'm going to do it again, and it's a book about forgiveness. And then you're like, ooh, yeah, I think this is it. And you start, like, I was just working with a client yesterday who's writing nonfiction, but it's the same process. He has 3 books in one. He comes to me with his book, and it's like, these are 3 books. And so then we start, do you want to write this book? What are some books that are like that? Do you want to be on the shelf with those books? And it's like, no, I do not. Then a second book, do you want to write that book? Do you want to be on the shelf with those books? Like, yeah, I do, but also this other. Okay, so is there a way to combine these two? Is there a way to look at this, to combine these 3? Is there, structure is the solution to all these problems, by the way. Is there a way to structure it? Because structure is the tree trunk, it's the spine, it's the thing it's the container to contain all these ideas. But it's, what is the primary thing? It's a question every single writer has to answer. So it sounds like, Valerie, you're 100% on the path of inquiry that will get you to writing a super powerful book. And I would just urge you to bring the same level of self-awareness and inquiry that you brought to the process itself to the book of thinking of what is it really, who is it really for, where, when are they encountering it, what other books, asking what other books they read is always so helpful, because it's like, okay, the person who just got breast cancer goes into the bookstore, these are the 3 books that she's going to buy for sure. Or like my daughter just had a baby, so used to be back in the day, everybody bought What to Expect When You're Expecting. It was almost like a Bible for all of us. Well, there's a new book now that all the new moms buy that I have now heard, that is called Expecting Better, which I love because it literally pings off that thing. But it's by an economist who brings statistical analysis to some of these ideas that back in the day we were all like just took for granted. So there's like, what is the person walking into the bookstore who just found out that they're pregnant going to buy? Well, they're going to buy that book because, like, I know 12 pregnant people now and they've all bought that book. So they're going to buy that book. When are they going to buy mine? Where in that process are they going to buy mine? Are they going to buy mine after they read that? Are they going to buy mine at the same time? Are they going to buy mine 6 months later? Are they going to buy mine when the child's 2 years old? Like, thinking, I mean, that's a really specific example because it's, pregnancy has a timeline, grief does not. But where in their journey, what have they already read? What I happen to, I said before, love books on grief. I read them all, I love them. So I would have read them all. But would your reader have not read any when they come to your book? Is this, I'm thinking about like, oh, I don't want to get into it because I'll go down a rabbit hole, but right, what else are they reading? What else do they know? What else have they listened to on a podcast? Where are they encountering mine? And what journey can I take them on? That's what you want to sort out.
I mean, what I notice is like all the front end work that you ask writers to do. I mean, like all of the questions, really.
Yeah.
I mean, there's 13 questions before you actually get to the writing the story outline. Right, Jennie? I mean, that's
everything. I mean, what I always say is that I operate in the space before you write. In a perfect world, before you write anything, I happen to think that writing your way to the answers is the most inefficient way possible. You can do it. I've done it. I've coached people who've done it. Obviously, there's tons of people in the world who do it, but I'm just here to shine a light on, you have to answer these questions one way or the other. You can answer them through writing, but it's 300 pages that might take you to an answer that's like, that's not the book I want to write. Right? It could be 2 years of work that is getting you to the place of saying, actually, I really wanted to write about forgiveness, not about my son's death. And that's not to say that that work is wasted. It's a process and we're all in it and we do the best we can. And sometimes people argue with me and they're like, you can't answer all those questions before you start to write. And that's true to a certain extent. But if you try, you're going to be in a much better position than if you don't try. That's what I have seen. I have seen just a little work on the blueprint can save literally years of going down the wrong path. So I'm just a massive fan of what I would call intention, the writer's intention. Do you intend other people to read this? Where do you intend them to encounter it? What do you intend for them to get from it? What do you intend yourself to get from it? What do you want it to do for you? These kinds of meta questions that have nothing to do with the story itself, really, are the ones most writers don't answer. And you can tell when you read their book. It's like, oh yeah, you didn't answer these questions because it's all over the place, right? So I mean, it's powerful work you're doing. You're in it, and I wish you well.
Thank
Hmm.
you. I've
Those are
really enjoyed your process. As I told Karin, I had done the outline on one like limited idea, and then it's changed. So like just like you were just saying, like it's like, well, wait a minute, this other stuff keeps coming up, so maybe it's really about that. And so like I go back.
Yeah.
So
hmm
Yeah, it's a process of inquiry. That's what you're putting your idea to the test. That's what you're doing. Stress testing your idea.
I think that's what Danny Shapiro calls her books, her memoirs, an
Oh, she
inquiry.
does? What does
She
she
calls
call
them
it?
inquiries.
Oh, got it, got it, got it. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Um, so I know there's a lot of questions in the chat. I just want to look at my calendar. Um, I can stay about 10 more minutes if you want me to, or we can be done.
Sure, if you can stay 10 more minutes, that would be great just to answer a few of these questions here. And Valerie, I'm going to take you off.
Yeah,
thank
Um,
you.
I can answer really quickly. Okay, so Joan asks, maybe not to everyone, but it's a good question about how to use the blueprint if you've already written your memoir. Here's what you do. You go in and you make the impact outline, and there's a checklist to test how you've done, and you work on the impact outline until all those test questions are answered. It's how I coach revision. It's a great process. So you just go in and do that impact outline for your finished book. That's what I would do. Um, and the question about word count and traditional publishers, Betsy, 33,000 is very, very short for any book. So uh, it uh, paring back the branches doesn't mean writing a short book. It's not the same question or the same thing. It's when I'm talking about paring things back, I'm talking about intention. So you've got to have a fully length book for most publishers to consider it. Okay, Mario's asking, is based on a true story considered fiction where it's kind of memoir but has some elements that move around? Yes, that's exactly what it is, based on a true story. And people love those just as much as they love memoir, right? We all love those. Okay. Let's see. I'm just reading Mari's. I don't know if there's not a question, but Mari, you do make a really good point, which I skipped over, which is actually not something I normally do, to thank Valerie for being willing to share. That is very vulnerable, and especially with her story. And Karin had asked me in advance about it, so I knew it was happening, and that's maybe why I skipped the thank you. But we should all thank her very much for being willing to do that. It's scary. And Valerie, that was helpful, I think, to everybody. So I know I come in hot with my advice on these things because I'm like trying to get through it. But thank you. And Mari, thank you very much for reminding me of that and all of us of that. Okay, so Rachel I don't think has a question, maybe just thanking me, which is really nice. Thank you. And I am going to start a Substack. It's actually already there. It's not paid, it's free. If you want to join, I don't even know how to say it. Is it Substack at Jennie Nash or Jennie Nash at Substack? You can find me if you just Google it. It's going live the first week of January, but actually tomorrow I'm having a sneaky first post. So if you want to learn from me, that's a place where I will be teaching for no cost.
You've bounced around a little bit. I remember you were on Medium for a while, and
I'm such a bouncer. I have so much FOMO. All my friends are on Substack. So the podcast is the hashtag Am Writing podcast on January 2nd with the scenes left out of the memoir. It's really good. It's going to be really good. Mario's asking if it's based on a true story, should I use the fiction blueprint or the memoir? I would do both. I would put it through both. There is in the blueprint for a memoir, there's a page, I can't remember, it might be page 35, in which I say that if you need the other, just email me and I'll give it to you for free. So you can, if you get the blueprint for memoir, you could get the fiction one for just a digital link to it. But I would do both. I think you could get important things from both. Okay, let's see what else. Other people just privately thanking me, which is really nice. Thank you. There was um
There's a question from Wendy. Is memoir, is it best to have a proposal first?
oh um here is the thing. The blueprint leads directly to a proposal. The elements of the blueprint lead very specifically into sections of the proposal. So if you do the blueprint, you're basically working on your proposal.
Mm-hmm.
What I do with my clients who are writing, who are writing proposals is we start with a blueprint and then we do the move it into the proposal. So I would do the blueprint, then write the manuscript, then write the book proposal for memoir. That's what I suggest. And memoir proposals don't have to be super long and detailed.
Mm-hmm.
Most publishers really appreciate them. But they're pretty easy to write if you've done the blueprint. There was a question from Jeff, which made me laugh out loud, even though I didn't actually laugh out loud. It made me
Mm-hmm.
laugh out loud in my head because I said that centering the reader is not as of primary importance for fiction the way it is for memoir. And he asked why. And I laughed because it's like, I could write a whole book about that. But what I'm trying to do is help people solve for the primary problem that we see them get wrong. And in fiction, it's getting emotion on the page and connecting it to the events, the plot. So that's the primary thing we have to work on with fiction. And you absolutely have to center the reader in fiction too. Absolutely. It's just slightly less explicit, which is a very hard thing to explain because it's not necessarily implicit in a memoir, but it's more so than in fiction.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a super big question that it would take me weeks to answer. So some other time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's see. A length of memoir. I mean, books are typically start around 50,000 words. Memoirs, you don't want them to be too long. So I would say somewhere between 50 and 80,000 is, and what would you say?
Yeah, I think so.
Can I give advice on how to determine where to end the story? Yes, I can. So, the story ends when the question posed at the beginning is resolved. So, if there is no question posed at the beginning, you have a problem with your beginning, not your ending. If you can't end it, it usually means you have a problem with the beginning. So I think of the two, the beginning and the ending, as bookends. They go together, or inhale, exhale. They go together. You want that ending to ping back to the beginning. Otherwise, it's not doing its job. This book that I just told you I was reading, Absolution by Alice McDermott. Oh my gosh, so good. And it ended in a place that I was like, wait, what? I kept paging back. I was reading on my Kindle and I was like, that surely can't be the end. And it was like, oh my gosh, it's the end. And then I like read it again and again and again. And I was like, okay. Like this book was so good. And I was like, I can figure out what this means. I can figure out why this is the end. And it was just so subtle but resonant and just like and it was one of those things where it's like, I got to go back to the beginning and start
Oh my
again.
gosh, your nerdy self, your like book coach
Right?
self is like, hey, let me break this down.
Totally. But it's that ending has to deliver whatever is the question at the beginning. So the question, like with Valerie's story that we just saw, if she's writing about forgiveness, something in the beginning would be around forgiveness. You know, my son has died and I'm angry at the whole world and I hate everyone. I don't know what's the opposite of forgiveness. That's what came to me, right? Something that would, so that at the end when she's forgiving herself and everyone, it pings back to that resentment, right? So the beginning, that's how you end it. And if you can't end it, so the thing with memoir that's particularly interesting is the story's still going on. You're still alive. It's still happening. And what people get into trouble is they're like, ooh, maybe I'll wait until that birthday to end it, or maybe I'll wait until this thing happens to end it, or maybe I'll wait until this to end it. And it's like, well, now you're telling yourself you don't know what the trunk of that tree is, because you're searching for some artificial thing that would end it. So
It's interesting because you don't really emphasize the story question at all in the blueprint, and yet you're talking about it quite a bit here.
I use it as the point. Like, what's the
Oh,
point?
okay. Got it.
Yeah. What's the
Okay.
point?
Mm-hmm.
But it's just different words.
Yeah. No,
Well,
thanks.
we should probably be done.
Yes.
I
Thank
know I
you
came in
so
like a big
much.
fire hose for
No,
y'all.
it's great. I just let you talk, which is amazing. You're, I, I think everyone got so much out of this, and also, you know, we didn't get through the 14 points, but then everyone can go buy your book. So there you
That's
go.
true.
If you want to
Well,
see,
here's the other thing. On this new Substack that I'm going to be doing, I'm probably going to be doing like Q&As and FAQs and things like that. So I'm if you guys want to ask them, I will answer. So that's what
great,
I'm going to be trying to do over there.
super.
That's at least my intention. So we'll see.
All right.
Um,
Well,
I want to thank Karin not only for inviting me, but for gathering an amazing group of serious and intentional writers.
mm,
These spaces are so sacred, and you're so lucky to be in them and have a compassionate and wise leader. And it's just, I always love coming into these spaces. So thank you for what you're doing, and
thank you.
for the writers, what you're doing for each other, and you're light years ahead of other writers by just being in this space. So,
Well, I'm just so grateful that you're a part of my community, and here's to more. Still
yay!
unfolding. All right. Take care,
Yay!
everybody. Thank you, Jenny.
Bye.